Hi, this is Lance Wallnau. Welcome to the intense and in-depth Bible study. I believe that you're smart. I don't think that people that watch this kind of broadcast are biblically illiterate or unaware of what's happening in the world. But what I want to do in this broadcast is especially important because I'm seeing a reformation get stalled and a movement gets stuck. And a lot of it is because there's witchcraft, and it's such a powerful type of witchcraft. It's almost like the populace of America, and that includes the church, is under a fog. It's under a kind of an arresting spirit that cannot see clearly either what is really happening right now or what needs to take place. I remember when I wrote the book on God's Chaos Candidate to talk about President Trump, and so much of that, like at least 50% of this, is a prophetic book chronicling the patterns of where we are in history and what the pressure is that is on the country right now. And when I wrote it, one of the advertisements we used was, "There is a spell on America and it must be broken." And what I was thinking about was Elijah dealing with Jezebel and the people who were halting between two opinions. You realize right now, in our own time period, we've had, like the Mueller report has gone out, and the data is out there from, my gosh, what was that? It was 19 attorneys, 2,500 subpoenas, 400 FBI agents, 2,000 interviews, and nothing could be found. And yet right now, as that information comes out, the power of the collective mind control of mass media is bombarding a new narrative 24 hours a day, still working on a lie in order to control the conversation of the country in an effort to obtain power for policies that are fundamentally going to destroy America. And I'm thinking the average Christian might get it or not get it, or kind of feel, my gosh, like one person said to me, and I'm not being critical, but I hear this a lot, "Oh, I really love the president. I just wish he wouldn't tweet the way he does." I mean, it's such a shallow perception of the battle we're in and what's happening right now. So I want to summarize for you what's taking place, and it's a Bible study. So how does the Bible relate to this? Well, here's the point. Most preachers are not relating the Bible to what's happening. It's like you're sitting in the crescendo of history and carrying on a separate conversation about dreams and depression or potential and prophecy, and it's bizarre, actually. So where we are right now is a warfare over the establishment or dissolution of the modern nation state. There's nothing less than global order being worked out right now. And the United States is the big obstruction to Satan's agenda. So I want you to imagine this. There are three powers at work, three global forces, if you will, and they're all kind of converging in the center. And the United States stands as a kind of an obstinate interruption to this agenda. You have China emerging. China, this massive, monstrous economic titan that is expanding all the way through the Asian Pacific Rim, it's already assimilated Hong Kong, has now made it illegal virtually to go to church. If you're 18 years old or younger, you cannot go to church with your parents. They have actually spent more last year on surveillance technology than on military development. And much to my shock, and this actually it doesn't shock me, it's the power of principalities and mind control. I've talked to Christians in that area who know that the churches are being plowed down, who know that the crosses are being cut off, who know that there are families in churches that are right now being interrogated and pastors that are under arrest, and there are people in congregations who have been tortured in order to and treated with psycho-inducing drugs in order to get them out of the church mindset, who are turning testimony against pastors so that the state can make a case that the church is a cult. This is going on right now. And you don't hear about it. You don't hear about the 200 Christians that are gunned down in Nigeria, that were hacked to death and were burned alive because they're Christians, and it was actually Muslim political motivated terrorism. But you didn't hear that, but you were hearing about the incident in New Zealand. So what do you do when you don't have control of the media, and you're dependent on Silicon Valley to filter for you what is worth listening to and what isn't? It's no wonder that people are falling into deception. Like I said, I've got Christians that are thinking that China's on the right path and it's going in a great direction. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how could you know what I just said and say that? It's like people, there was an H5 bill recently that was presented. You probably didn't even hear about it. Presented by Pelosi and Schumer. This H5 bill would be a rewriting of the Civil Rights Act so that inserted in there would be the language that would make it criminal for a Christian to treat. Now what they're going to do is they're going to take transgender and LGBT issues and insert it into the language of civil rights so that a church, a family-owned business would have to be employing and hiring and bringing in people whose lifestyles are totally incompatible with what the Bible itself teaches for those people. In other words, it's the erasing of religious liberty and destroying it in the name of a civil right, instead of recognizing that there's a difference that we have to work out in terms of issues of conscience and freedom of religion. The left is all about rewriting and restructuring society so that it takes you over and eradicates your freedom of religion. Not much unlike communist China. If what I'm teaching and what I'm saying makes sense to you, it's because it's coming out of a fresh revelation. I believe the Lord's saying that the major game right now isn't seven mountains of culture. It's not politics. It's not America. It's an assault on sovereign nation states. Literally, you're living in the time when nation states are being attacked. Patriotism, nationalism is actually being branded as fascists. My God, what is happening? Well, what we're covering in our Bible studies, what we're covering in our news broadcasts, what we're covering on social media is the rise and fall of nations. And you're right now on the front lines of a redefinition of the conflict. I don't know if you know it yet, but life on earth is going to be changing over the next 2 to 3 years radically, because nations are rising and falling depending on whether the people of God can exert their influence through a sustained pattern of persuasion to maintain or expand their freedoms and right to exist. Sheep and goat nations are being formed right now. We're in the moment when nation states are rising, and nationalism, patriotism, and the emergence of Cyrus rulers are actually on the front page of the morning news every day, but nobody's given us a language to interpret the template. This series will do it for you. You'll never misunderstand what's happening in the news once you have the rise and fall of nations. So, why am I bringing all that stuff up? Because when you look at what Christians are focusing on, if you do not know who your enemy is, and you do not know what your enemy is doing, how could you possibly war a good warfare? And even though people will be very quick to tell me, well, Lance, our battle isn't with flesh and blood, it's with spirits. Well, you've got to know what those spirits are doing with flesh and blood. You got to know who's getting into your house, who's getting access to your children, and what are they saying to them? And how are they influencing them? So China is a major concern right now. And I just came from Taiwan, where that little island of 20 million people is seeking to resist the aggressive assimilation, which China declared they belong to mainland China. And yet Taiwan actually was the rebellion against the communists, took off to an island where they established democracy and freedom of religion. And they are resisting the 1 billion man nation. And they're doing it like David against Goliath. But you haven't heard about that. I was just there twice this year. But China's a major factor. And what we're hearing, which is very dormant, has been the caliphate, discussion, which is radical Islam. But I'm telling you what the forces are that are converging in the last days, and how the United States preserves a world order that resists the assimilation of these forces. So radical Islam, because the president has made it his objective to eradicate ISIS. ISIS, you might remember, was one of the reasons why Trump actually came into office. My first meeting with him was after the ugly beheading of all those Christians on the beaches of, where was it, Lebanon or something. And Trump was so horrified by that. It was affected by it. And as we were talking about it, I realized that President Obama did nothing other than create a vacuum in Iraq, so that by pulling our military out, the vacuum was created for a militarizing force to go in, and then we were not dealing with it. How do you know we weren't dealing with it? Because you haven't heard a thing about it since Donald Trump became president, and that's while he's fighting a coup to try to take him out of office, and turning the economy around and negotiating trade all over the globe and getting us out of the Paris peace accords and reforming the criminal justice system while moving embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I mean, it's bam, bam, bam. It's amazing what this guy can do under duress when he's being fought by the Department of Justice, by the FBI, by deep state, rogue, former leaders in the CIA. He's literally fighting the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN 24/7 with their propaganda machine. And we are, so many of us in the church world are like the children of Israel, halting between two opinions. Well, I don't know. We'll have to wait till the report comes out and find out what it says. Well, the report said that, but then they said that he still is guilty. It's like that's not normal. You know what it is? It's history repeating itself. That's why you're hearing all the prophets talking about Elijah right now. Well, we need Elijah. Why? Because Elijah deals with Jezebel. And when Elijah deals with the spirit of Jezebel, it breaks the witchcraft off the people of God, and they say, woo, the Lord, He is God. And you have a national move, basically, of people aligning for the sake of their own survival with God, because they were stuck between two opinions. That's what witchcraft does. It messes with your head. But that goes right to this whole, I don't even know what to call this third thing anymore. I used to call it liberalism. I thought, no, it's really not liberalism, it's leftism, but then it's really not leftism. And I want to call it progressive. It's just, we're in search of the right word. But I'm going to tell you what the root of it is. It's the resurgence of Marxism. It's the resurgence of secular fundamentalism. That is why you have the emergence of the politicians you're having who are moving more and more to the left. You want to get free education, you want to get free health care, you want to get free this, you want to get free that. Well, all you have to do is realize that everybody and every economy in the world could do everything for free, except somebody's actually going to have to end up paying for it. And if there's nobody to pay for it, it's called a recession, a depression, or a destroyed economy. And that's pretty much what you got in Venezuela. That's what caused the Soviet Union to collapse. This is the only reason why China's a power, is because the United States has been doing such terribly destructive trade deals. We've inflated it like a balloon based on trade with us. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. China wouldn't work. So here's what you got. You got these forces, and this is the EU, and this is what's in the universities and in the Democratic Party right now. It's in the media, and it's what you have in the USA trying to take apart the United States. So I wrote a chapter years ago in What is America's Role in the World? Actually, I grabbed a hold of an economist who set up the Chinese stock exchange, Mark Nuttall, and I asked him to help me with explaining why America's role is what it is. And here's the amazing thing. We just saw a survey. McLaughlin Group did a survey, and I'll have to get the exact data, but I think it's almost like 56% of Americans think the United States is the biggest problem in the world. Where did that come from? It comes from the media, academic, liberal elites who actually don't like America. They bought the poison that America is a racist, patriarchy, a colonizing force, when in fact the United States of America is keeping these forces that are the progressive left and the resurgence of aggressive Islam from Iran throughout the Middle East, and the assimilation of the Asia-Pacific Rim and the Silk Beltway all the way through South America and Africa. So these forces are being held back by the United States, and then it's all coming down to one guy in the White House who is standing like an obstruction against a force that is trying to break into the House. But listen to the role of the United States. The United States military is the only worldwide force that keeps the world from breaking apart at the seams. Being a military superpower means if we shrunk our military commitment, if we withdrew back to our borders within weeks, if not days, China would threaten Taiwan, Pakistan and India would continue border skirmishes that would escalate, Colombia and Venezuela would have internal wars maintaining without the ability to maintain any treaties with their neighbor. Russia would be completely unchecked, and the Middle East would explode, and non-state actors would pick up the mantle of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and warlords worldwide would move with abandon. Literally, the world would become a regional danger zone with pirates operating in the fault lines of those conflicts. For commerce to continue worldwide, the sea lanes have to remain open, particularly narrow lanes like the Straits of Hormuz. It may be possible to coordinate the British Navy with other local authorities, but such an organization does not exist. Only the United States has the capacity to maintain global trade, sea lanes, and the rule of law, because our military keeps rogue actors in check. In terms of economics, the country right here is the economic engine room for the world. Contrary to what the socialists want to do to brick it, all the goods and services of the world come down to 50% of America keeping the engine moving. If our markets were to decline, the world would get triggered into a depression. Further, we're the only truly free enterprise system in the world. We're less regulated and less restricted than any other country. The reason that Japan is able to pay its government bills with very little growth internally is because Toyota can come to the United States and manufacture cars and sell them worldwide and pay some taxes back to Japan. Germany, Britain, France, Italy all sell their high-end goods in the United States, and creating jobs for those economies, creating jobs to the point where our infrastructure and our manufacturing was gutted. And as a result, the opioid crisis isn't a drug crisis. It's an economic crisis because we moved all our jobs out of the industrial areas, and in the vacuum, there is no employment, there's no meaning, there's no purpose. And we watch what happens to men when they have no reason to live and no self-respect. They become addicts, and the suicide rate increases. In terms of finances, the United States is the world's largest banking system. Other countries have banks, but the size and diversity of our banking system is absolutely unparalleled. The most important value the United States currently provides for the world is its currency, the dollar, its stability. It's the world's secondary currency. It's not the world's secondary currency. Actually, the dollar is the world's primary currency. So in terms of 184 countries, including observer countries that are members of the World Trade Organization, they would not be able to exist was it not for the stability of the American dollar. So what's at stake? Global economy and military stability and the rule of law. Now, what do you think is going to happen when that restraining force that the United States represents is taken out of the picture? Well, there you do have your classic end-time scenario. You have your Christians that'll go, well, Lance, the Bible predicts all that. But it's funny how the closer it gets to you, your house, your family, and your life, you start thinking, gee, I'm wondering if this is necessary or if maybe we're just allowing things to happen. Remember this, the spirit of Antichrist in the Bible seeks to change times and seasons. So what I want to dedicate this next segment to is I want to lay out for you the biblical pattern of times and seasons, the meaning of times, and with this backdrop, this global awareness that what we're seeing now is an attempt to dissolve nation states. So you're hearing the word nationalism getting blasted and likened unto some kind of it's called xenophobia, or some kind of a unhealthy right-wing force. When in fact, as is true with everything I've had to research as a Christian, it's like, wait a second, I was lied to on a lot of this. Nationalism isn't the problem. It was nationalism that saved the world from Adolf Hitler. See, Hitler wasn't a nationalist. Hitler was interested in an empire. He wanted to assimilate Germans everywhere, not just in Germany, but in every place that the Germanic people were. He wanted those nations to become united with him. So remember this. It's the forces of a totalitarian empire, of large government taking over the boundaries of your life. That's actually the force that wrecks nations and wrecks history. It's not nation states. So as I'm reading this book, and it's written by somebody who's actually quoting the Bible in here, Mosaic Law. I think it must be a Jewish writer, Yoram Hazony. And he's talking about the role that Protestantism played in history to create the modern nation state, to create the rule of law that could be able to create the modern nation state. And then as he goes on in his book, he says stuff here that is chilling to me as I read it. Because I'm looking at news feeds and realizing that there's a new world order being pursued and that it's unpopular to have patriotism in nations. So they're called extreme right-wingers. So if you see Viktor Orban, for instance, in Hungary, he wants to have boundaries and a restoration of Judeo-Christian values in Hungary. He's called a right-wing extremist. You see how the left labels those that are patriotic for the nation as right-wing extremists. They've done it with Bolsonaro in Brazil. And as I'm looking at that, remember what we predicted. We predicted that there would be a Cyrus coming into office, but Donald Trump is a type of Cyrus. But remember this, Cyrus is a leader that is raised up for the sake of God's people out of the secular oceans. It's not necessarily just an individual. It's not like Donald Trump and Cyrus. There's a Cyrus anointing, if you will, in the era we're in for leaders of nation states to rise up to preserve their nations. And there are forces like Haman that are out to destroy the people of God and create the administrative state, a global empire, if you will, an empire that'll make room for the ambitions of Islam and the appetite of China and the suppression of Christianity globally. And that's the spirit we're up against. So, I just read randomly one chapter last night on the virtue of nationalism and Western freedom. And what he says here is that having been initiated into the liberal paradigm, educated men and women now find employment within a vast array of projects that assume a liberal construction of the world. The political program of European unification, the expansion of free immigration of populations moving through porous borders where we don't have borders, the transitioning of business into multinational large corporations. And I'm realizing, oh my God, Amazon, Google, Facebook, they're not American businesses. They're global businesses. Do you understand why when we do our 7 mountains, the top of the multinational corporations, they want the globalist world order because they're citizens of the world. They vacation in Europe and have a house in Manhattan or a condo in Manhattan. So serving the global economy rather than particular national interests, the subjugation of nations to an ever-expanding body of what's happening in Europe now through The Hague, international laws, the agitation for universal human rights through NGOs, the UN bodies, the international courts right now in Europe that Bolton and Trump are shutting down, and Mike Pompeo. Do you realize that Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo, Bolton, we've got people that are actually the answer to prayer right now, pushing back on this system while it's trying to take Americans into the world court and into this world UN body of government and international court system. The homogenization of all the world's universities by way of a system of international standards and peer review that is done by elites that are the liberal progressives of Europe and the United States and the Ivy Leagues. And what I'm reading about here is that being a patriotic lover of your nation is now considered a right-wing extremist danger. And here's how it happened. At the end of World War II, as Europe was bludgeoned by 2 world wars, what had filled the vacuum in terms of understanding what took place was the false narrative that Hitler was a nationalist, when in fact Hitler was a dictator who did not honor boundaries. Nationalism, which was the patriotism of Churchill for Great Britain and FDR for the United States, is what defeated the agenda of Imperial Japan and Imperial Fascist Germany. Why am I saying that to you right now? Because it's critically important that you and I understand the spiritual battle that we're up against for awakening, for revival, for new wineskins, for the Spirit being poured out, for the move of God and for the nation. All of that language, which is all pregnant and permeates my part of the world in Christianity, cannot manifest itself if it doesn't understand the puzzle pieces of what we're really up against. Elijah didn't defeat Jezebel because he had a signs and wonders crusade in Tel Aviv or something. He defeated Jezebel by going right into the epicenter of where the political power was and dismantling it. So what we're going to do in the Bible studies that are going to be started now is we're going to look at the survey of the pattern of the times and visitation from where we are right now. We have to see Cyrus. We have to see Nehemiah restoring the wall. We have to see Ezra. We have to see the first phases of Reformation. And we have to make a decision where we are in that timeline. Because right now, America's just halting back and forth. And you can almost hear the frustration of some conservative commentators. And I listen to them, and it's like from Mark Levin to Rush. They can hardly believe how reality is constantly being overruled by the mind control narrative of the left. And they see what's at stake. They're coming after Trump, folks. They want him out of office. And lawlessness doesn't respect law, but it does respect the populace, because the populace has muscle. So this broadcast and what follows is a prophetic alarm. If you want to see the new wineskin the prophets are talking about, if you want to hear new wine, it's not coming from some revival somewhere in some far-off place that's going to have people go to it and get changed. This is an hour when we're in the Nehemiah chapter of the Bible, where we're at war with principalities and powers and need to have a building anointing and the strong Holy Spirit power of God on this hand, and we need to be strong with a sword in the other, or you're going to lose the inheritance of what God gave you. Not because God planned on taking America down, but because you and I were inept at protecting it when God opened a window of grace. So be watching for the next broadcast. Share this with your friends. We've got to go down this road. I've been looking forward to doing this for a while, and we're going to start this week.